We've got a lot to talk about, and joining us live, Sanyade Okoli, CEO, Alpha African Advisory. In any moment now, we should, of course, have Arise business analyst Bode Osasami joining us any moment now to discuss. But Sanyade, let's start with you. I saw your extensive notes that you were taking during the 30-minute, the 15-minute speech from Vice President, and another 15 minutes of questions. So much. Shall we start with vaccine production? Because he did talk about collaboration. But let me get your thoughts. Let me get your reaction.
I think my initial thoughts are he really hit a lot of the key issues. And it reminded me of a piece I read a couple of weeks ago called What Will Future Generations Condemn Us For? By Kwame Anthony Appiah. And when I read that piece and discussing it with a few other people, a couple of things that came to mind was one about the whole debt burden, growing debt, where not enough conversations are being had about them today. So I'm glad he spoke about that.
Okay.
Then, of course, we talk a lot about climate change, but not enough about this whole transition program where developing worlds do not feel, for want of a better expression, that they've had their fair share of negative impact.
On the climate.
On the climate. And so, we do have increasing energy needs, and we do need to address those energy needs. And it seems to make very little sense to a lot of people, say here in Nigeria, where we have gas, we have the ability to meet our own energy needs, but we're being constrained in doing so, not least because the financing is not being made available. So these are continuing inequities that we need to discuss and we need to address. And, a few other issues, but overall, interesting conversation.
Indeed, yeah, very, very, again, Vice President, glad to hear from. So I guess and we've had you on the show before to talk about the whole matter of Africa's ability to produce vaccines. The Vice President did say that there needs to be collaboration, but how much of it is collaboration? How much of it is the infrastructure being on ground to be able to produce the vaccines that would address a pandemic like this?
Well, one of the things that hit me, and I'll step back in responding to your question, when he was speaking is, we need to be able to correctly dimension what we on the continent need to do ourselves, what we can partially do but require the support of the international community, and what we need the international community to take the lead on. And I guess your question is, where does vaccine production sit along that continuum?
Right.
And I think it really depends on the country. Last week we spoke about Egypt, where they have put in place a pharmaceutical manufacturing business hub or industrial hub.
Yeah, and exports are up 35%.
So they are clearly in a better position to do more of that than some other countries. So are we looking at some sort of hybrid solution where we're having more of the production done on the continent, if not directly in the countries? Because, again, it's all about being cognizant of where things are today, but the issues that we also need to address today.
Fantastic. All right, let's bring in Arise business analyst Bode Osasami. Bode, we've got more calls for assistance for Africa here. What are your thoughts on, I guess, what we just heard from the Vice President of Nigeria?
Well, the Vice President, as was expected, was very clear in terms of the issues and, of course, the observations, learnings, especially during the last 2 years, which has been difficult for every country, every continent, including Africa. My short take on the call for support is that if you look at even the latest World Bank data, especially in terms of growth, they're expecting that we would see the global economy decelerate markedly to 4.1% from 5.5% in 2022, with continued COVID-19 flare-ups, diminished fiscal support, and lingering supply bottlenecks. In a nutshell, it's going to be a very busy period, especially for economies trying to get back on their feet and also coping with all kinds of social pressures. You see what's going on in the UK with high inflation and issues in terms of how the COVID was handled by the Prime Minister. And I think this is a symptom of the kind of environment you will see everywhere. What I'm trying to say is the world is going to be very busy. And we really cannot expect a lot, even in spite of well-meaning intentions to support Nigeria. I think a lot has to be inwards, just like we heard from Sanyade when she was saying that we need to know what we can do, Sanyade, what we can do ourselves, and what we expect the world to do. And I think we should lean more on what we have to do, the adjustments we can make. Although he is quite right to identify that clearly you can't, this is a global village, and what happens in Nigeria, either in climate, in the economy, very quickly impacts what happens in other parts of the world. So there is an interest in ensuring Africa gets up. But Africa is also, I would say, at crossroads. We can either embrace reform, embrace the learnings from the last 2 years and make progress, or we can continue to do business as usual. Thankfully, listening to some of the initiatives that the Vice President enumerated, Nigeria is trying to go a different path, reform and learn from the virus experience. But one thing, let me just say, the last thing I should say is execution, navigating change, and progressing change is very, very, very different from knowing what the issues are, even planning, because actually getting it done, getting things done, I think that has been the bane of many African countries. Even though we talk about things, we have good, if you like, plans, and also legislation sometimes are very well written. When we get to execution, it becomes potentially problematic. So, but it's interesting. I don't think these are problems that are going to be solved in one meeting, or we're going to be explained in one dialogue session.
Thank you so much for that, Bode. Sanyade, I want to come back to you. It seems like climate change has dominated this conversation, but something else the Vice President talked about was terrorism. Terrorism on the African continent, its impact, and again calling for assistance. Has focus shifted? I mean, we saw it, well, this was in the Middle East, where bombings in the UAE caused oil prices to rise. But, Mozambique, Total, last year, declaring a force majeure on the $20 billion LNG project in Mozambique. Is terrorism not still a front and center issue that needs to be addressed on the continent?
Terrorism is indeed a front and center issue. But then we also have to ask ourselves, what are some of the triggering factors to the social and security issues that we do find? So if we take, for example, with Nigeria and the Boko Haram issue, it does relate to climate change in that because of the Lake Chad and the whole desertification issue. So we can't afford to look at any of these issues in isolation because they are completely interlinked. But then I also want to pick up on something Bode said, because it was very much in my mind, where, yes, it's absolutely great, identifying the issues. But when I think of Nigeria, and I think that 2022 is a pre-election year, I wonder to what extent a lot of the things that the Vice President has said, we're talking about the National Development Plan and getting the private sector more involved and creating an enabling environment, I wonder to what extent they are going to execute in a pre-election year.
Bode, what are your thoughts on? Thank you, Sanyade. As far as insecurity, its impact, and so on, what's your take on what the Vice President said?
I think it's extremely important. If there is no peace, you really can't. You're not going to get investors. Whatever you do, whatever you say, immediately they have an experience. Just going into the website and hearing what's been broadcast in the news is enough to put off some investors in terms of coming into Nigeria. So my sense is clearly the security issue is a major issue to address. But apart from addressing the security issues, there are other issues. There are other huge gaps in kindly let me put up. I'm sorry.
To Middle East. We have a great panel, and of course we discuss.
All right, we're still discussing, of course, the impact of insecurity here on the African continent, what it means, as Bode Oshosumi was just saying there, the impact on investment, and what the outcomes are if we do not successfully address that. Sanyade, I guess another thing that was mentioned was technology. It's not a magic pill that can just solve things, because this technology is linked to, we've talked about internet access and so on and so forth. The Vice President did mention that as well. What can technology do? Should we invest more there, lean more on it, or is it a non-starter if you don't get the right infrastructure in place?
I think it's neither or both, i.e. technology is the way forward. We're not operating in isolation. We're part of this whole global village. And to be able to interact effectively, we do need technology. We saw what happened with the pandemic, where we all had to essentially go online. Schools went online, businesses went online. So we needed that enabling infrastructure to do so. But having said that, we're not going to be able to optimize technology without the electricity. Technology is being used in businesses, e-commerce, etc. We need the roads for easier logistics, etc., etc. So again, it's having a holistic approach in setting the policies and in the implementation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, Bode, please, if you wanted to finish your point, go right ahead.
About that. Indeed, security is important, but I was just about to go into infrastructure before Sanyade raised those issues. But clearly there is a link between issues around security and then the poor education, infrastructure gaps, poor health services, and one has to look at everything together. The other thing, of course, that is relevant is not just trying to stop the terrorism, but also the global cooperation. One thing I'm learning, especially in the last 2 years, is that global cooperation is key. Now you have smart cities, you have all kinds of technology that you can use to reduce a lot of the issues and the challenges you could have, especially with terrorism. But you need to be, I would say, present, especially in the global space, so that you can have access to a lot of some of these technology. You need to have the cooperation. You need to sign the pacts with those that are involved, and so that you really are present in the global war against terrorism. I'm not sure Nigeria is as visible. The president particularly has done more in the international space of recent, but I think initially he wasn't very visible in a lot of the discussions and dialogues. And if you're not there at those global meetings, a lot of this technology and a lot of the intelligence and new ways of fighting terrorism, you may not have access to it. But just like Sanyade was saying, if you address terrorism without addressing health infrastructure, education, and some of these other issues, IT, because one of the ways you used to fight the terrorism is with technology infrastructure, broadband. There are ways in which you can use new recognition technologies to spot terrorists. Just maybe they're just walking out of their house, and you can spot them, and obviously begin to have databases of people that could be problematic. So it's more than just bringing in the money; it's understanding the total picture and investing appropriately.
Thanks, Bode. We're going to take a quick break on the Global Business Report. We'll continue the conversation after the break. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to the Global Business Report on the Rise News. We're still reacting to the address from Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Osinbajo, at the World Economic Forum, the Davos agenda. We have, of course, Sanyade Okoli, CEO, Alpha African Advisory, and we also have Arise business analyst, Bode Oshosumi, over in the UK discussing this. Sanyade, okay, we'll come back to you. So we've talked terrorism, we've talked technology, we've talked climate change. Vice President Osinbajo also talked about, I think it was in answering one of the questions from the moderator, an enabling business environment, which yourself and Bode have both talked about extensively on several segments on the show. But once again, how important is that in the grand scheme of things?
Absolutely critical. To be honest, I think the first thing that I did find heartening was him acknowledging that private sector were going to be key for the national development, and that their focus was going to be on creating the enabling environment. it'd be interesting to see how quickly they are going to essentially get to the place where they have created that enabling environment, because requiring, I think he said, 80 of the 348 trillion required,
yeah, of which
86% was going to
private sector.
Private sector is like, how are you going to catalyze that level of investment? I think in the past I've spoken about the need for guarantees, especially infrastructure, sovereign guarantees, and the whole concern about regulatory environments and ensuring that the different sectors have favorable regulatory environment, and investors can be confident that when they bring in their money, they will be able to realize returns. Essentially, that their fortunes are as best as possible in their own hands and not in the hands of government and regulators, etc.
Thank you. Bode, your thoughts, you've also talked about this extensively, Bode, the enabling business environment.
Well, I don't want to sound cynical, but I've heard this just too many times for too long. In the last 10 years, not even 5 years, we've been saying almost exactly the same thing. And talking to the analysts on the field, what they want to see is walking the talk. There's a lot of talking, a lot of ideas, even reform quote, whether they're whittled down, but at least we were seeing some reforms in some area. Look at the oil and gas sector, for example. We aren't even able to meet our quotas simply because the money just isn't coming in. And why isn't the money coming in? The environment is seen as increasingly toxic by the investors. It doesn't matter what you think or what the central bank thinks or what the minister is saying. What really counts is what the investor is saying, what the investor thinks, and what the independent analysts who are looking at your environment think. We have gone from denial to doing things about it and laying out plans, and in some cases, we've seen some semblances of reform. But I think it's still at very, very early stages. We need a lot more momentum than we have now. And I think we need to listen more to the investor and less to ourselves. Otherwise, we're just not going to get it right.
Thanks, Bode. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I think just to what Bode is saying, there's been an erosion of trust over a period of time where things are said and they're not delivered. And the question to Bode's point is, when are we going to see action? What's going to be done? And I said, my own concern is 2023, certainly in Nigeria, all eyes are focused on 2023, we're in 2022. Are they going to shake any tables? Are they going to make any sudden moves, which long term could be beneficial, but in the short term, they might think could cost them an election? I am concerned.
Well, Bode, what do you think about that? The possibility of reform in a pre-election year?
Well, you know the answer to that question. It's not going to happen. Of course, I mean, we just saw an example of subsidy reform, and now nothing's going to happen till June. And of course, if nothing doesn't happen till June, it's unlikely that anything will happen between June and December. But I think we just have to admit that we keep going over these things over and over again. And I think leadership change is an opportunity to get in those who want to create the impact. But I think the electorate should be very sensitive. We want to know what they are going to do differently. And we also want leaders that are going to be accountable. So when you say you're going to do something, we can ask you in a month's time, in 6 months' time, in 3 years' time, have you done it? And people shouldn't feel when we ask these questions that we're being cheeky. It's just the normal thing that's done in every other part of the world. So much more accountability we hope we'll have by the time we do this next election for our leaders. Because without accountability, these are just words.
Excellent stuff. Just a couple of minutes ago, FX liquidity, that was another thing that Vice President Osinbajo mentioned. I think it came up in a question. I mean, we can't continue to depend on oil to bring it in, but what are your thoughts on that regard?
Well, again, this was another one I thought, okay, this is great. He's talking about, the foreign exchange market being driven by markets,
right,
rather than by government.
Right.
When? How?
Those are the key questions. But I'll give you the final word with a minute or so to go, unless you want to say we've heard this before, but FX liquidity in Nigeria.
Well, I don't want to say we've heard it before. I think we are making progress there, actually, because you can see that there is now more sensitivity to the market and moving away from government-centric systems to a more market-driven system. But, of course, many believe that we need to go much, much faster. But there are challenges, and I can appreciate the effort Central Bank is making.
All right. But yes, on technology, Africa has lent a lot, boosted, technology, but has it lent enough? Quickly, if you can, sorry, in about a minute or so.
I think two things that are important as far as learnings. One, Africa's perspective can be very different from Western perspectives. And the example is this issue of gas as a transition fuel. And we really have to have a stronger voice in global dialogue at early stages before things move too far. Otherwise, you will have climate change just coming out as something that is developed in Europe or between Europe and the US, and Africa is not involved. So getting Africa's voice in global dialogue is one major learning. The other major learning, apart from the fact that we need to have good technology backbone, is the need to strengthen international and global ties. Of course, self-sufficiency in the health space is absolutely critical. It's just too critical. I don't think you can expect them to give you their intellectual property. That is a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. So we just have to sit down and think through how to get it done without expecting Pfizer to give us their IP or their patents.
Arise business analyst Bode Osasami in the UK, Sanyade Okoli, CEO, Alpha African Advisor. I want to thank you both for joining us for your reactions to Vice President Osinbajo'S address to the World Economic Forum, the Davos agenda. I do thank you both very much.